One victim's burns were so deep, his bones were visible through the skin. Sounds like the start of a horror movie, right? But this isn't fiction. This was life under Emperor Domitian, a ruler who turned fear into his most powerful weapon. In this video, we'll uncover how a boy overshadowed by his famous brother grew into one of Rome's most feared emperors, the shocking tortures he used to control his people, what modern psychology says about his cruelty, and how his paranoia eventually brought him down. Stick around, because Domitian's story is a reminder of just how dangerous unchecked power can become. Domitian was born in Rome in the year 51 CE, the youngest son of Vespasian, who would later become emperor, and Flavia Domitilla. But from the very start, his life looked very different from that of his older brother, Titus. Titus was groomed for greatness. He received a high-level education at court, studying alongside Britannicus, the son of Emperor Claudius. Domitian, on the other hand, was left in the shadows. His childhood was marked by loss. His mother and sister died while he was still young, and his father and brother were often away commanding armies. That meant Domitian spent much of his adolescence alone, with little guidance or emotional support. Ancient writers describe him as intelligent but neglected, a boy constantly compared to his successful brother. Imagine growing up in a world where your sibling is destined for glory, while you're treated as an afterthought. That kind of isolation can take a toll, and modern psychologists suggest experiences like this can contribute to antisocial or even dangerous behavior later in life. So when we look at Domitian's reign of terror years later, these early wounds start to make more sense. Rome wasn't just raising a future emperor, it was shaping someone who would one day use cruelty as both a shield and a weapon. By the late 70s CE, Domitian was still living in the background of Roman politics. His father Vespasian had restored stability after years of chaos, and his brother Titus became emperor after Vespasian's death. Once again, Domitian was pushed aside, taking only ceremonial roles while Titus ruled with popularity and respect. But everything changed in the year 81 CE. Titus suddenly fell ill and died. Some whispered it was from natural causes, others suspected poison. And guess who the rumors pointed to? Domitian. Whether or not he was responsible, one thing is clear: he wasted no time seizing the moment. While his brother lay on his deathbed, Domitian rushed to the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite soldiers, and had himself declared emperor before anyone else could challenge him. This bold move shocked Rome. Unlike previous emperors who carefully eased their way into power, Domitian came out swinging. From day one, he set a different tone. He wasn't interested in winning love or building alliances. He wanted obedience, he wanted fear, and to make that crystal clear, he took a title no Roman ruler had ever dared to use while still alive. He called himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Imagine the impact of that. Senators, generals, and ordinary citizens were now expected to bow not just to an emperor, but to someone who demanded divine worship. This was the birth of Domitian's reign of fear. And soon, Rome would discover just how far he was willing to go to make sure no one ever doubted his authority. Domitian didn't waste time showing Rome what kind of emperor he intended to be. His very first years in power were marked by shocking displays of authority and cruelty. One of his earliest acts was the trial of 3 Vestal virgins, Rome's most sacred priestesses, accused of breaking their vow of chastity. Now, in Roman tradition, the Vestals were untouchable. Even whispers against them were rare, and previous emperors often handled such cases with discretion. But not Domitian. He turned it into a public spectacle. The virgins were convicted, and Domitian ordered their execution. Imagine the message that sent to the people of Rome. If even the most holy women in the empire could be punished so brutally, then no one was beyond his reach. Religious law became less about faith and more about fear. This wasn't just about morality, it was about control. Domitian understood that terror worked faster than loyalty. Senators started watching their every word in the Senate chamber, knowing a single misstep could mean exile, torture, or death. Ordinary citizens stopped gathering in large crowds. People lowered their voices, whispered in shadows, and lived with the constant fear of drawing unwanted attention. And the most chilling part, that fear became normal. Within just a few months, Rome had shifted from a city of open debate to a city of silence. Domitian had transformed himself not into a leader loved by his people, but into a ruler whose power rested on intimidation. And this, as frightening as it already sounds, was only the beginning, because soon Domitian would move beyond public punishments into a world of systematic torture that even hardened Roman soldiers found unbearable. Once Domitian had secured his throne, fear wasn't enough. He wanted absolute obedience. And that's when his cruelty evolved into something far darker: systematic torture. One method became infamous among Rome's elite: the use of red-hot irons. Senators accused of treason or conspiracy weren't given fair trials. Instead, they were dragged before the emperor and subjected to truth extraction. Historical accounts describe victims restrained as heated iron rods were pressed against them. It wasn't random brutality. Domitian's torturers used medical precision, ensuring the victim stayed alive long enough to spread the emperor's message. Resistance meant suffering, but this wasn't his only invention. Christians, seen by Domitian as a threat to his divine authority, faced some of his most grotesque punishments. One account describes victims smeared in honey and milk, then confined inside wooden barrels. Insects swarmed from outside, while contaminated food ensured suffering from within. It was a slow, humiliating death designed not just to kill, but to break spirits and terrify entire communities. And then there were the public spectacles. Borrowing from older Greek traditions, Domitian revived the gruesome bronze bull, a hollow metal statue heated over fire where victims were locked inside and essentially roasted alive. For Domitian, this wasn't only punishment, it was theater. Families were forced to watch, soldiers stood as witnesses, and rumors spread across the empire. The result, terror, wasn't confined to the palace. It seeped into every corner of Rome. People didn't just fear what Domitian might do, they feared being seen by him at all. And yet, as horrifying as these tortures were, what made them truly effective was the psychology behind them. Domitian knew that pain inflicted in secret dies in silence, but pain inflicted in public echoes forever. As Domitian's reign went on, his cruelty didn't just target enemies of the state. It began creeping closer and closer to home, and that's when fear inside the palace reached its peak. One of the most shocking examples was his own cousin, Flavius Clemens. Clemens wasn't just family, he was one of the few people Domitian once claimed to trust. But when rumors spread that Clemens had converted to Christianity, Domitian snapped. Instead of a quiet dismissal, he staged a brutal public execution. Clemens was tortured in front of other family members, a chilling message that even blood ties couldn't protect anyone. And it didn't stop there. Domitian began turning on his most loyal servants. Epaphroditus, his trusted secretary who had served him faithfully for years, was suddenly executed. No clear reason, just suspicion and paranoia. Imagine being in the imperial court, watching the emperor destroy the very people who had built their lives around him. If his cousin and secretary weren't safe, who was? By this point, senators, generals, even household staff lived in constant terror. Conversations were whispered, smiles were forced, because with Domitian, trust meant nothing. A shared meal today could turn into an execution tomorrow, and this paranoia only made his reign more unstable. The cruelty that once secured his power was now pushing his allies away. Rome was beginning to see that Domitian's greatest enemy wasn't rebellion or religion. It was his own fear. So what turned Domitian into one of Rome's most feared emperors? Historians and psychologists point to a mix of personal trauma and unchecked power. Think back to his childhood, overshadowed by Titus, abandoned emotionally, and left isolated for long stretches of his youth. Modern psychology tells us that kind of upbringing can fuel resentment, insecurity, and even antisocial behavior later in life. Now add the absolute power of the Roman throne. Domitian wasn't just ruling an empire, he declared himself Lord and God. Psychologists today would call this a classic case of narcissism mixed with paranoia. He demanded worship, but at the same time trusted no one. What made him even more dangerous was what experts call organized sadism. His tortures weren't random bursts of anger. They were carefully planned, precise, and designed to maximize both physical and psychological suffering. That's why senators, soldiers, even family members lived in constant fear, because cruelty wasn't just punishment under Domitian, it was policy. Compared to rulers like Caligula or Nero, Domitian was colder, more calculated. He wasn't satisfied with chaos for its own sake. He used fear like a tool, and that's what made his reign so effective and so terrifying. But here's the thing about ruling through fear: eventually, it turns back on you. By 96 CE, Domitian had alienated almost everyone around him. Senators hated him, generals distrusted him, and even his closest attendants lived in terror. The final straw came when he executed two people who were far too close: his cousin Flavius Clemens and his longtime secretary, Epaphroditus. With those deaths, it became clear nobody was safe, and that was the breaking point. A conspiracy formed inside the palace itself. Led by his chamberlain, Parthenius, and carried out by a man named Stephanus, who faked an injury so he could hide a dagger in his bandages, the plot was bold but simple. One day in September, Stephanus approached Domitian with a petition. As the emperor read the document, Stephanus struck, stabbing him in the groin. Domitian fought back fiercely, but more conspirators rushed in. After a violent struggle, the self-proclaimed Lord and God was cut down in his own palace. In the end, the man who demanded worship as a living god died not as a ruler of Rome, but as a paranoid tyrant betrayed by the very people closest to him. Domitian's legacy is a chilling reminder of how power can corrupt. In just 15 years, he turned Rome into a city where whispers replaced conversation and fear replaced loyalty. His paranoia destroyed not only his enemies, but his own family, his allies, and finally himself. And yet, his story isn't just ancient history. It's a warning: whenever leaders demand blind loyalty, use fear as their weapon, or place themselves above everyone else, we should remember where that road can lead. So what do you think? Was Domitian Rome's cruelest emperor, or do Caligula and Nero still hold that title? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this story fascinating, don't miss what's coming next: the bizarre tale of Emperor Caligula's floating bridge of madness. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join me as we uncover more of history's darkest chapters.